Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, as this 2016 presidential election cycle, or the debacle and fiasco that it is wound up being, unfurls before our very eyes, we come to see that once again this whole notion of our First Amendment freedom of expression has come under direct and dire threat. And the reason that I can say this with the absolute amount of certainty and clarity with which I do as I speak into the microphone is because we have seen this problem slowly advance throughout the course of recent history over the past several election cycles. As my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have oftentimes warned on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, we have seen this cancerous doctrine of political correctness attempt to strangle the very idea of being able to speak one's mind without fear of societal repercussion or governmental tyranny crushing down on that most American of values. And of course, when I say that most American of values, I'm speaking of our ability to be able to communicate freely. In fact, this whole notion of the freedom of expression was so important and considered with such high regard by our founding fathers that it was included in the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. There really is no way to get around just how significant and important that right truly is. But we see that as America grows more divided than we've ever been since the time of 1860, that's right, folks, the year right before the start of the war between the states, or as it is known in the common vernacular as the American Civil War, we find that the whole notion of freedom of speech is being trampled upon. And this is on what could be considered, and what has been considered by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, as both extremes of the political spectrum. Even though we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have oftentimes reiterated that we do not believe that Trump is a conservative, at least the common perception that has been perpetrated by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is that Trump is a conservative. It's because he goes before their cameras and loudly proclaims it and repeats it in his oft-times rambling and confusing statements, which seem far-fetched and really detached from reality itself. Nevertheless, what we see is that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist left-wingers have always been diametrically opposed to this notion of the freedom of expression. And the reason they're against it is because they know wholeheartedly, that their ideas would not be able to compete in the marketplace of ideas. In other words, it's not based on logic or reason or the ability to discuss or to persuade people based on the merits of the argument and the merits alone. Therefore, they turn to raw emotionalism. They turn to attacking these sorts of things, and by manipulating the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. That is their diabolical plan and scheme. But what we see is there is this orchestrated media circus. And if Donald Trump is anything, it's that he is a master manipulator of the media. He has always been able to have them eat out of the palm of his hands. And this goes back to the start of his real estate business empire some 30 years ago. Nevertheless, what it really boils down to is there is this major and significant problem with respect to Donald Trump and freedom of speech. Remember, going back a few months ago when there were those protests in Nevada and in Chicago and in various other locales where Trump was planning to hold a rally. And everyone got after Texas Senator Ted Cruz for saying that Trump incited violence. Well, there were the statements made by Trump in front of the cameras of the salivating mainstream media in which he said that he would pay for the legal fees of those who would just throw a haymaker into the face of a protester. And he also said that in the good old days, disruptors like that would be carried out on a stretcher. And remember, there is this whole notion of the fighting words doctrine, which states that not all forms of speech are protected by the First Amendment. Because if that were the case, then speech such as child pornography would be acceptable. Remember that the whole key and core component with respect to our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, or the God of nature, is that those rights end where another sovereign individual's rights begin. And so what Cruz was saying at that time, and as we explained at that time, was that it's wrong for the protesters to try and disrupt Trump's ability to be heard or to speak, even though there is no true right to being heard. But it was also wrong for Trump to respond the way that he did. And of course, Trump went out and displayed his full lack of knowledge with respect to the proper functioning of the First Amendment freedom of expression when he came out and said that these protesters were violating his First Amendment rights. Now, first of all, we have to recall what the First Amendment actually said. It said, Congress shall make no law. That means government encroachment upon, not the encroachment upon by private individuals. Of course, one of the tantamount aspects of, or paramount aspects more clearly, of the First Amendment is the fact, or of any amendment for that matter, any right, is that you have to accept the consequences and responsibility for taking the actions that you chose to take. That is a quintessential aspect of the American heritage, character, spirit, and identity. But again, there is this push by the Fabian socialist left to essentially eradicate this whole notion of one having to take responsibility for the consequences of one's actions. That's why we see that the Barack Hussein Obama regime has been pushing to stop using the term felon or felony. They are attempting to rewrite the entire lexicon of the penal code and of crime and punishment in the United States of America. And as we've said, dating back to our first episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, the left always likes to play this twisted, dark, and dangerous game of semantics, where they try and twist the meanings of words from their traditional root definition to something wholly different than what it was ever intended to mean. And of course, that is something that we have to be wholly aware of, because it represents a truly problematic aspect of the entire political system, or the entire political discourse in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. But back to this notion of free speech and why it is under assault. We know why those who are pushing for the Fabian socialist agenda want to have free speech curtailed. But there is the dangerous aspect of what Donald Trump is trying to do, because as we've mentioned on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, Donald Trump has repeatedly stated that he wants to loosen our libel laws and thereby eradicate the public figure exception to put a chilling effect on free speech. Now, of course, I added the chilling effect because he didn't actually come out and say that, but it has that implication. That is its meaning. His whole idea is to go after and sue people. He is one of the most litigious people in all of United States history. Of course, what he doesn't realize is that the original purpose of our judiciary was not to be some get-rich-quick scheme, or not to be some first resort, battle of first resort. No, the courts are to be taken up, and the litigious battles are to be waged as a matter of last resort. It is when you have exhausted all other avenues, all other things have broken down, because in a true sense, the way that our adversarial system works is to be like combat. It is a way to resolve differences that would otherwise have been resolved by duels or some other way of being on a proverbial field of honor in a civil fashion without the need for violence or bloodshed. But that notion of it has been lost because there have been those who adhere to critical legal theories or studies, which is a form of jurisprudence or judicial philosophy or legal philosophy that preaches that it should be utilized as a weapon to fundamentally transform the pillars of American society as we know and love it. Think about the ACLU. That is why they were designed. They were designed to use the Constitution in order to destroy the Constitution. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, and that works all sorts of problems in and of itself. But nevertheless, that is part of the quintessential nature of the sorts of problems that we're facing in America. And it shows no signs of improving at any time in the immediate or foreseeable future. So we see that this stage continues to play out, and where one of our most cherished, fundamental, and inalienable rights is continually put at risk. And as the way the media portrays it by both ends of the political spectrum, although the media will try and tilt it to say that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists, the true dyed-in-the-wool that would follow the self-avowed socialist Vermont Senator Noidface Boyne Me Sanders, but they would display that as being not that bad, and Trump as some sort of fascistic sort of dictator, which he does have those qualities, as we have mentioned on past episodes, but not to the degree and not as lopsidedly as the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are trying to paint the picture as. And that in and of itself is a problem. It shows that twisted propagandistic agenda that they are attempting to foist upon the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And again, it goes against everything that is so drastically important in America. This idea of the people being able to make a decision for themselves. And again, it reiterates that whole twisted and erroneous notion that the United States of America is a democracy. America never has, and God willing, never will be a direct democracy. We are a representative republic with democratic elections. Let's keep it at that, because a true republic recognizes the rights of the sovereign individual, whereas a democracy only recognizes the sovereign rights of a majority, thereby allowing there to be both a tyranny of the majority and a tyranny of the minority. And in either case, the rights of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, become trampled upon in such cases. And therefore, we have to be exceedingly cautious and exceedingly careful to ensure that our rights do not simply evaporate or become eviscerated by this diabolical system. Remember that Benjamin Franklin had defined democracy as two wolves and a sheep or lamb voting for what's for dinner. The tyranny of the majority would ensure that the lamb would get eaten every time, whereas a tyranny of the minority would ensure that the wolves would starve to death. You see, the entire purpose of a representative republic is designed to work through the notion of civil discourse. But the entire purpose of having the First Amendment freedom of expression is to allow the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, to have an avenue at which to express concerns about the government. It's why we also have the even less talked about, less well-known notion of a freedom to assemble, to gather, to approach the government for a redress of grievances. That is an amazing, beautiful aspect of our natural law infused representative Republican form of government. It shows just how clearly our founding fathers were thinking and the great infinite wisdom and foresight that they had when they conceived of this government over 230 years ago. And that would also explain why our government is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional republic in all of world history. In the course of human events, no government has been as stable, secure, open, honest, or free as that of the United States of America. And that is something that we have come to take for granted here. And I think that's why we see such polarization occurring within the body politique of the United States. It's because we have failed to realize just how monumental and magnificent our Constitution is, and everything that it represents actually is. And that's due, thanks in no small part, to the revisionist historians that have infested our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border. There really is no way around that either, folks. This sort of incessant, well-orchestrated, deliberate, and intentional attack upon our fundamental and inalienable rights, as well as the true scope and application of not only the government, but also our cherished history, has led us to this path, to where decorum, which is the acceptance of a traditional set of right behavior, not political correctness, but moral correctness, has been cast by the wayside and replaced by the twin disastrous and cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. These two perversions work hand in hand and in tandem to tear at the very heart of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And the sooner that we come to realize this, the sooner we'll be able to start to rebuff it or to rebut it and to start moving this nation back onto the path to prosperity. Because you must remember that even though so many people are clamoring to find some sort of a messianic figure to bring America back from the brink of ruin, if you really want to find the saviors of America, I suggest that you look in a mirror, because of the way that our country is designed. Looking at the opening lines to the preamble to the United States Constitution, we see that it starts with the lines, "We the people." That's who created this government. It is based on the natural law. And pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is also known as the Supremacy Clause, the United States Constitution itself constitutes the supreme law of the land. Again, this is where Jeremy and I both have trouble with the mafioso quafioso, because he doesn't adhere to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. And he even said back in 2012 in an interview with the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that the reason he never fully read the Constitution is because he didn't find any value in it. Folks, I find that to be a very dangerous, very foolish statement to be made, particularly when you consider that the whole protection of the popular sovereigns and of our rightful and legitimate authority comes from that document, the separations of powers. Part of the problem that we've had with these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime is that Obama has been working in tireless fashion to strip and deprive us of those separations of power. He's essentially wanted to create a one-man carnival show dictatorship, transforming or fundamentally changing the United States of America away from that of a constitutionally endowed representative republic to a banana republic where he can be President Peel and Squeal or the Chiquita in chief. We can't afford that. We cannot afford to continue to walk down this path to just unbridled death, depravity, and destruction. Yet that's exactly what the Fabian socialists and their allies from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media want and wish and desire to perpetrate upon the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. Again, it's something we can ill afford, particularly when you consider that right now, as I speak into this microphone, the United States of America is in the midst of not only an identity crisis, but a slew of constitutional crises created by the Obama regime. And we see that because of the feckless efforts, the mere token resistance, if any resistance at all, was posed by the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has not led us anywhere. That will tie into the sort of anger that we're seeing expressed. But because we have reached a point to where there is no value found in this idea of the common good of the Republic, that there is this notion of a national heritage, character, spirit, and above all, identity, we find that Americans are looking at each other in divided fashion with greater hostility than ever before. Remember that George Washington, upon his farewell from the White House, in delivering, or not the White House, but just his farewell address from the presidency, he stated that if you fall into these factions, if you allow yourself to be manipulated into these factions, you are creating or allowing a form of despotism to sink its claws into the body politic of the United States. Because you lose sight of the greater good. You begin to be all consumed by the particular spurious interests of that organization or that faction to which you declare or swear allegiance to. And we see it with this push for the tyranny of false unity. This whole idea that if you refuse to vote for either of the two mainstay candidates for the mainstay two parties, that you're somehow voting for the worst of two evils. Why? That is factionalization at its worst. That is walking into the trap that George Washington went above and beyond the thought of the time to warn us about. He was warning us about just how significantly dangerous that was, and just the amount of threat that it posed to, at that time, a fledgling representative republic. But those dangers are still just as real, even though this is now the longest contiguous running representative republic in the course of human events in all of world history. And there have been a lot of dangers and travesties and hurdles and adversities and obstacles that the United States of America has overcome since he made those prophetic words in the 1790s. But we find now that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the Salivating Mainstream Media, in conjunction with their allies in the Fabian Socialist movement, actually believe that they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light means that their goal is within reach. And that their goal has been, for the past century and a half, to drastically, fundamentally, permanently, and irreparably, depending upon how you look on this, transform the United States of America, to change it away from this freedom-based, freedom-loving society into a Fabian socialist dystopia that really should have no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. So again, we find ourselves in this dangerous, untenable situation because of our inability to learn from the past. And it brings to mind that old adage that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. That's where we find ourselves right now. We find ourselves so close to this period in time of the nation's history that we are about to tear ourselves apart. And for what reason? For what purpose? What do we honestly hope to achieve by engaging in this sort of divisive and destructive behavior? It's really not something that comes easily to the mind. It's not something that we should just sweep under the rug or just disregard offhandedly, as if it's an insignificant thing, because nothing could be further from the truth. What we face right now is a dire threat, a significant, real challenge to our system of polity, which is a tried, true, and tested system. It has withstood the test of time, and I think it will withstand the test of time here again. But we must be fully cognizant of just how significant and important our rights are. If you think back to the opening decades of our republic, and particularly with the most contentious presidential election of that time being the election of 1800, which became known in the common vernacular as the Revolution of 1800, one of the key significant impacts of that was the Alien Sedition Acts. Here were a set of bills that were attempting to make criticism of the federal government, and namely the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States of America, a punishable criminal offense. Now, the way that Adams and his Federalist Party attempted to couch that and to justify that was to claim that it was due to this threat of war from the nation of France. The nation of France, which had been an ally in helping us form this nation. Remember the Marquis de Lafayette. He was a favorite commander from France of General George Washington. And the French did provide us with help. But it was a tenuous relationship, and it was a rocky and fiery one because of the way that the French always have rocky and fiery relationships with their allies. Nevertheless, it was an important aspect, and we see that at that time, what George Washington had been warning about before Adams even assumed the position of president and claimed the reins of political power, he was trying to say, look, these factions that are developing, the Democratic Republican Party, which titular head was Thomas Jefferson, and the Federalist Party, which had the titular head of John Adams, were already drawing the line in the sand. They were already threatening to break apart the fledgling republic. In fact, it was so bad and so divisive that when Jefferson won the so-called Revolution of 1800, he stated in his inaugural address that we are all Federalists and that we are all Democratic Republicans, because he realized, as anyone who was involved in that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence realized, that the United States of America, as a liberty-loving, representative Republican form of government, was greater than the sum of its parts. And that is the significant cultural, societal aspect that has been lost over time, thanks to revisionist history, thanks to the incessant efforts of those Fabian socialists who are hell-bent on tearing this nation apart at the seams. And unless and until we come to this realization that that is what these nefarious outside alien attacking forces are all about, then we are never really going to come to terms with the death spiral and all of these other problems that are currently facing this once thriving and flourishing and even vibrant republic, nation, people, and society. And that's a very disheartening thought, particularly when you consider this twisted, dark, and diabolical narrative that is being spun by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They are not standing up for our best interests. They are not looking out for us. They are perpetuating something that will either sell them ratings or, more importantly, advocate or advance their propagandistic goal and agenda for Fabian socialism. And again, the Fabian socialists have been exceedingly successful in their use of the tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactics and strategies of divide and conquer. They want to pit American citizen against American citizen, thereby making it easier to manipulate them in a really flared up and inflamed sort of animosity to then drastically, permanently, fundamentally, and irreparably transform the United States of America away from a representative Republican form of government into that Fabian socialist dystopia, which, as I stated before, really has no place in an open, honest, free society like that of the United States. So here we are, some 235 years after the initial formation of the United States of America, and we're facing a time in which the twin cancerous doctrines, destructive doctrines, malicious doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism are threatening to undermine our entire foundation. And of course, the foundation of America is based on the natural laws. And we find that in the greatest contractual document ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. And of course, that of which I speak is none other than our shared United States Constitution. It is such a beautiful document, and it accomplishes so much, and it really is the supreme law of the land. And the idea the very notion that our founding fathers included within its four corners this ability, pursuant to Article 5, and then again pursuant to the preamble to the Bill of Rights, to amend it, but not just for any type of passing political fad that might catch the fancy or the imagination of the population at one particular time, was amazing. It showed that they understood that the whole goal was to try to attain or achieve a more perfect union. They fully realized that they could not create a perfect union. In fact, one of the famous phrases, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, from James Madison, who history has named the father of our Constitution, said is, "It's not a very good document, but it's the best we could do at the time." Yet that not very good document, that so-called not very good document, is the longest, continuous, uninterrupted Constitution in all of world history. Think of the modesty that was portrayed there by the father of the Constitution. Think about just how significant that is. Think about what humility and humbleness is all about. And then look at the two presumptive nominees of both of the mainstay parties in the United States of America today, and you see all of those glaring, despicable, grotesque, and detestable qualities of factionalization that George Washington was warning us about in his farewell address. We have come full circle in American history. We see now that the fights that were hashed out on the battlefields of liberty over 2 centuries ago are about to be rewaged right now. Except that this time, we have this diabolical notion of the lesser of two evils, or what I think is more apropos with reference to this, the lesser of two weasels. Either way, you've still got a weasel. And if we are a hen house, those weasels are going to kill all of the hens. And that would be the destruction of the posterity of the United States. And remember that our founding fathers expected us to hand down the fundamental and inalienable rights that we have, the ability to enjoy them, and the contract that is created between every popular sovereign by right of birth or naturalization to the next generation, to the up-and-coming generations, and indeed to those generations which have yet to be born. That, too, is a quintessential aspect of American history. That was also a revolutionary charter, if you will, with respect to history itself. Because this whole notion of the natural law tenets, which underpin not only our shared Constitution, but also our representative Republican form of government, traces its origins all the way back to 1215 at the field of Runnymede, and the baronage demanding of one King John, whose popular fictional image is that of the villain of any and every Robin Hood story, that no, he couldn't be an absolutist. No, that sovereignty could not merely rest in the hands of the king, that you could not have government without the consent of the governed. What an amazing process. You watch its origins, the birth of it, on that field at Runnymede, and trace it all the way down to the inception and conception of the United States of America, and you see just how significant the natural law is. The natural law, at its very essence, at its core, is merely the natural order of things. It is that which is ascribed or inscribed on the hearts, souls, and minds of free, sovereign individuals. That, coupled with the fact that our founding fathers said it was we the people who came together to ordain, establish, and proclaim that contract, which is the Constitution of the United States of America, that was revolutionary. That had never been tried in the course of human events before. Never once had the people been entrusted with such power. And it reminds me of that story that we have oft times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, about that young woman who ran up to Benjamin Franklin shortly after the Constitutional Convention and asked Mr. Franklin, "Mr. Franklin, what have you given us?" He turns to her and he says in rather nonchalant fashion that we have given you a republic if, and this is key here, if you can keep it. In other words, we the people are endowed with these fundamental and inalienable rights from our Creator, the God of nature, to hand down this free system, and that includes the freedom of speech. But we were expected to maintain, protect, safeguard, and ensure that it could be handed down to posterity, to ensure that the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which had yet to be born, would be able to enjoy and exercise their fundamental and inalienable rights with even greater ease than we ourselves were able to enjoy it. That is not some small task. That is not something that can be sugar-coated, candy-coated, or swept under the rug. But again, the diabolical narrative perpetuated constantly by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media would have us believe that that was insignificant, that that never really happened, and that the Founding Fathers were nothing more than a conglomeration or amalgamation of all of those deep-seated, terrible things of the past, judging them with the mores of a modern era, instead of the mores of their time, which would be more appropriate, particularly given the historical context of the nature of the world at that time. But what they try and do is they try and transform the Founding Fathers away from these men that cared about true popular sovereignty, that cared about expanding the scope and breadth of freedom, which was truly a radical idea at the time, into these sexist, racist, homophobic, land-stealing, Indian-killing, genocidal maniacs. But again, that is revisionism. That is ignoring the true scope, application, and implications of history. That is attempting to push a Marxian ideology on a people that should be, by their very nature and by the very freedoms that they have earned as an inherent part of their birthright, diametrically opposed to such a system. But we see that that's not the case. That's not what's happening in our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border. And it's certainly not the narrative that the salivating mainstream media has been showing. And with this 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week media cycle that we have today, we see that our very institutions, the very things that define and distinguish us from the rest of the world, are under a deliberate, incessant attack. And the more that we come to the conclusion of what it is they're trying to do, the more we also have to come to the realization that what they are doing is not in the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That everywhere we turn, both of the titular main parties, the mainstay parties, are working in tandem towards stripping and depriving the American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable rights. That is what created the ramp and rank environment for a charlatan, a huckster, a con artist, a snake oil salesman, the P.T. Barnum of our era, Donald J. Trump, also known as John Barron, also known as John Miller, to have this bizarre ascendancy that he has. And now we see that his goal of driving a wedge between the base of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, creating these fractures and fissures, threatening to cleave the party in two, leaving us hopelessly divided when it comes time for this general election, which is slated for November. That's 5 months away now, folks. We see that the vitriol, the hatred, the venom, it is more vapid, more apparent, open, obvious, and even hostile right now than ever before. We are seeing the direct results of a campaign of divide and conquer, the use of scorched earth policies, tactics, strategies, and tactics. Why? What do we hope to gain from this? What is the purpose of this, unless it is to advance again the Fabian socialist agenda, which, as I had just stated, is diametrically opposed to the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. There can be no other way to describe it. There can be no other explanation for it which makes logical or good reasoned sense. And we see that the true frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists, who are very, very disenfranchised, very upset, very angry that the Democrat Party has not taken the mantle of socialism far enough, in their opinion, even though under Barack Hussein Obama we have had the most divisive, the most destructive president of living memory. But he is one in a long line of destructive presidents that have assumed the mantle of either progressivism or Fabian socialism, which are all just different names for the same political movement and ideology. And as conservative radio host and editor of Conservative Review, Mark Levin said, populism, which is something that is being advocated by Donald J. Trump, is just a thin veneer for progressivism and also Fabian socialism. Again, it goes back to that first thing that we ever warned about here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. And of course, that is this whole idea that there is this twisted game of semantics, that these nefarious forces that are vying for the deprivation of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, of their rightful and legitimate authority, is working nonstop at doing that. And so they create all of these fluffball pieces, all of these weasel words or buzzwords, which are by their very design and nature orchestrated and uttered to make people shut down their mental faculties and to just rawly emote, becoming as malleable as putty in the dark, dank, and dirty hands of these nefarious forces that would tear us apart, of these forces that Alexis Tocqueville had described as New Age feudalists, because they want to micromanage the daily facets of our lives. Every facet of our daily lives, from cradle until grave, they want to micromanage it. That is what the feudalist caste system of the medieval era practiced. And then when there are so many who sit there and say it is so difficult to imagine how those who would claim this false war on women by the Republicans, those same radical feminazis, radical, destructive Fabian socialists could ever align themselves with the theocracy and a barbaric approach to religion from the Islamo-fascist state, ISIS, or to radical Islam, as they want it to be called, radical Islam, instead of actually acknowledging that Islam has tenets in it that purport and support this sort of medieval, twisted, barbaric line of thought. Well, it's a collectivist thought. And they're both pushing for a medieval system. It's just that the Fabian socialists have a much more refined message. Think of it as having two forms of diamonds, one that's been cut and cleaned and one that's a diamond in the rough. Well, it's called a rough for a reason. It looks disgusting. It looks horrible, but it's still the same thing. If you polished it, shined it up, cut it, and clean it the way that the Fabians have, through incrementalization, through their diabolical, twisted, and dastardly deeds, yes, you can start to have it look like a diamond. But the fact of the matter is, what we really have here are rhinestones. They're trumpery. Now, isn't that an interesting word? Trumpery. Flashy, showy, but of little value. It's an archaic word. It was also a crime of fraud, trickery, and deception. You know, folks, you really can't make this stuff up. And it's there, plain as day, for everyone to see. But we see now that the United States of America is at the crossroads of history, where we either make a decision to continue down this path to the status quo, which will lead to this sort of attack and assault on our fundamental and inalienable rights, particularly our right of free speech or freedom of expression, And where will that leave us? In the end, clearly, where will that leave us? The answer is it's going to leave us in a very untenable situation. It is going to leave us in a place where we have wholly lost our identity, where we turn to the government to solve all the problems when in fact it was the government itself that created those problems in the first place. Stop and think about that for a moment, folks. This is the same thing as the Cloward-Piven principle. Remember that those were two Fabian socialist academicians who came up with this bovine excrement scheme to overwhelm the welfare system that had been created by the government, foisted upon the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, to make it to where it is so overwhelmed, overtaxed, overregulated, and that the people are so overwhelmed, overtaxed, and overregulated that they would come on bended knee to the government, to the central government, and to beg for drastic reforms to ultimately push for this claim of everyone just being provided with a living wage, that you could snap your fingers and then magically there'd be this living wage. It's almost like being trapped inside a Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon. That's how twisted, diabolical, and detached from reality their supposed logic is. And truth be told, there is no logic in that. That's not logic. That is the insane ramblings of a twisted ideology that is diametrically opposed to the inherent, fundamental, inalienable rights and freedoms enjoyed by all of us in our capacity as individual popular sovereigns of this once vibrant, thriving, and flourishing representative republic of ours. Where do we go from here? How do we continue to exist as a sovereign nation, or as a true nation, without the Constitution? And you see, there's another line that needs to be challenged with respect to the mafioso quafioso. A lot of what the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been trying to spin with respect to his brand of populism is that it's a new type of nationalism and populism all rolled into one hairy package. But the problem with that is, and as we have stated here on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, if the entire nation, our national heritage, character, spirit, and identity, and citizenship is all defined in the Constitution, and Donald J. Trump had stated back in 2012 that he found no inherent or intrinsic value in that document, and that's why he has never read that document from cover to cover. If he doesn't believe in the Constitution, which defines us as a nation, then what is his nationalism rooted in? What concept, what definition of nationalism are we working on here? It's certainly not that of the United States of America. It's certainly not that that coincides with all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing republic. It is something totally different. It is something which would fit kind of those Freudian slips that he had. For instance, when he appeared at that CNN town hall a few months back and stated that the three most important goals and objectives and indeed responsibilities or prerogatives of the federal government was to, 1, provide healthcare, 2, housing, and 3, education. But again, if you look at the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution, you'll find that no such obligation or authority exists or is enumerated unto the federal government. And remember, when we look at the natural order of things, which goes with the starting fundamental building block of any society, and indeed as the starting point of government, as the family up, and the closer you get to the family, the more power it's supposed to have, you see that Donald Trump's ideology here and ideations here are diametrically opposed to the true quintessential natural law spirit of the United States of America and the United States Constitution. And there really is no way that we can resolve this conflict. There is no way that we can draw it out to protect freedom of speech. And that brings me back to this whole notion of freedom of speech, where Trump says that he's going to open up our libel laws and get rid of this public figure exception. Why? Because he wants to sue everybody. Everybody's going to get rich. he polishes it off with this whole idea of everybody's going to be wealthy, everybody's going to be rich, me, money, 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 greed, 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 kind of like that victory speech he gave shortly after the New Hampshire primary victory several months back. But what does that have to do with our freedoms? Again, when he says that everything is negotiable, everything is up for negotiations, that includes our fundamental and inalienable rights. But those rights which were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature, are by their nature non-negotiable. They're non-delegable. This is dead on arrival. It should not even be placed on the bargaining table. And again, this is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about Trump for as long as we have. We have been one of the first sources out there to warn about it. Now, you're free to vote your conscience however you see fit. As we have said, we will never deign to tell our cherished listening passengers and audience members how to vote, how to exercise their fundamental and inalienable right to vote. But on the flip side of that, we ask that we don't be told how to vote. And we'll explain why we have come to the conclusions that we have, and that's exactly what I'm doing here on today's Solo Flight Special. When you stop and think about it, everything that is facing us as a nation and as a people right now, as I speak into this microphone, is created by this distance from the Constitution. It's the fact that the federal government, and indeed all levels of government for the most part, are not operating within the proper scope and application of government as mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the United States Constitution. And so long as this current pattern of conduct, and so long as this status quo, and the current extra-constitutional policies that have been foisted upon us by a rogue, tyrannical, and illegitimate government continue, we're not going to see things improve in this country. Now, of all the promises that have been made by the mafioso quafioso, I have not found one that truly lines up with the Constitution. I have not found one. And that's a significant problem. And yes, Hillary Clinton is a danger. She is the known danger. But here's a question that needs to be answered. Let's say that by some cruel twist of fate that Donald J. Trump actually manages to secure the election. And given the weak nature and feckless nature and spineless nature of this current legislative branch of government, particularly under the leadership of Mitch the Turtle McConnell and Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, who has caved on his refusal to endorse Trump, by the way. If Trump is in there as president, are they going to resist him? No. They will not even put up token resistance. They will just acquiesce to everything he wants. Sure, you'll have some in there who are good eggs that'll stand up to the onslaught. People like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, people like Utah Senator Mike Lee, people like Ben Sasse. They'll stand up. They'll do the right thing. And of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the supposed conservative punditry and commensurate, including the likes of Little Orphan Annie Yap Yap Toto the Floozy, and Matt, get me my tinfoil hat, I'm having a party with Alex Jones, Drudge Pravda, the Trumperbart News Network, fake news sites like Printly. They'll all come out and they'll all lambast these people. And then the Pied Piper's tune for the disillusioned conservatives will waft in discordinal fashion through the air and try to deceive each and every one of us. And again, this is why we say it is so important. It is of the utmost importance that we all gain, foster, and develop and encourage a fluent and working knowledge and understanding not only of our shared United States Constitution, but also of our fundamental and inalienable rights, so that we can then fully discern, fully recognize, fully comprehend the dire, direct threats that are being posed against our rights And not only that, but develop, devise, and work out practicable real-world solutions. This is why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I mentioned on that past episode the establishment of the constitutional compositionist movement. The whole idea here is to advocate for conservatism, but not just conservatism, but really the true application, the strict adherence to the United States Constitution, and to do it in such a way that it can exert power and influence over everything, not just one faction. You see, we have got to get back to this idea that was first floated by George Washington in his farewell address of escaping from these chains and shackles of factionalism. That is what has led us down to this untenable path of choosing the so-called lesser of two evils, which has continued to push the nation ever further to the left, further divorcing itself from the true language, intent, and ideology of our shared Constitution into this Fabian socialist dystopia that has no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. Again, we understand that this is not an easy position to hold. We understand that these nefarious forces who have been working for the past century and a half to deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights, to fundamentally and drastically redefine who we are both as a nation and as a people, they will not quit. They see that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, and they think that their goals and their objectives are within grasp. They think they can clutch it. They think they can reach their arm forth and grab it, and that will be it. That they will have achieved everything that they have worked so tirelessly, relentlessly, incessantly for, and that will be the end of the representative republic, and a true Fabian socialist nightmare will descend upon the United States of America, destroying this country as we know and love it. We cannot afford this. We cannot afford to become complacent, to let our guard down, to allow our nation to be swept right out from under our feet. Because if we allow that to happen, then we are betraying everything that this nation stands for. We are saying that our founding fathers fought in vain. We are saying that all of those who compose the best and brightest among the best and brightest on earth, those who are willing to don the uniform for the United States to fight for our ability to live free, their sacrifices would have been for nothing. I'm not willing to allow that to happen. As long as there is breath in my lungs, I will continue to say what I think is necessary for the best interests of this country, because I love this country. I love this nation's people. I love the Constitution and what it stands for and represents. Just as I am sure that the vast majority of our cherished listening passengers and audience members feel the exact same way. Yet here we stand, looking at the current state of affairs in this 2016 election cycle, more divided than ever. The venom, the hatred, the contempt has just bubbled to the surface. And then we see that Peggy Noonan puts out a rather vapid piece in which she said it's a good thing that we're not in agreement on things. No, Peggy, no. What should be agreed upon is that our fundamental and inalienable rights are not up for negotiation, that our representative Republican form of government should not be allowed to teeter on the edge of destruction, that we shouldn't just turn over the reins of power to some narcissist who is going to destroy us. And folks, I hate to say it, but Hillary Clinton's a narcissist that wants to destroy us, and Donald J. Trump sure seems that way too. Why else would he have, throughout her entire tenure as the senator for the state of New York, donated as much as he did to her? Why would he then go out in front of the cameras for the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and say that she was doing a wonderful job as Secretary of State? And to say that Barack Hussein Obama was doing great things because he was accomplishing things that no one else could? What, the bank bailouts? And yet, the whole narrative all throughout the primary process was how Ted Cruz was bad. Lion Ted, we can't trust him because he's owned by the banks. But I don't remember Ted Cruz being one that advocated for the bank bailouts. I don't remember Ted Cruz being the one that ever donated to these Fabian socialist causes, which were designed for no other purpose than to tear this nation apart at the seams. And on top of that, I don't remember Ted Cruz, even after the vicious, slanderous, libelous things you said, Trumpy, about his wife and his father, we're allowed to go out and say that we should just get rid of the public figure exception to our libel and slander laws. He didn't do any of that. He acted with class and character. Of course, the lying Trumpidians don't care. The lying Trumpidians don't see this as realistic. And so now he wants to call Hillary Lying Hillary. Why? Trump, you should wear that crown of thorns for yourself to complete this messianic package that you have attempted to deliver to the people. Why stop short? Why sell yourself short? You are the great manipulator of brand imaging. And you said on this recent Jake Tapper interview on CNN that every business I've ever been into has been a success. Really? How's Trump Shuttle doing? How's Trump Steaks doing? How's Trump Magazine doing? How's Trump Mortgages doing? Oh yeah, that's right. They're all defunct. They're not around. Now, yes, you roll out and use other people's things in substitution and claim that this is Trump steak. It's the best steak ever. I've got smally hands. I've got badly hair. Everybody loves me. I built a tower. It doesn't work. That charade doesn't work. That train has already left the station, and it ain't going to fly. Because trains don't fly. Planes do, but trains don't. Maybe you'll understand that concept, Trumpolini. Maybe. But the Don Trumpolini has this inflated image of himself. And he has this rather disturbing ability to just fly off the hinges with the mouth, letting that motor mouth of his run incessantly, nonstop, without ever thinking. But he's going to consult himself first and foremost. That's where he's going to get the majority of his advice, particularly with foreign policy issues and concerns. How is he even qualified? Oh, that's right. The lying Trumpidians tell us that he will always hire the best people, the bestliest of the best. Except he hasn't. Except he's gone out and fired all of the logistical frameworks that he had established in all of those various primary and caucus states that he won all throughout the primary process, thereby leaving us in a very untenable situation where Hillary will still have all of those machines in place. We'll have to build from scratch. Boy, that sure seems like incompetence until you start realizing that that's what a saboteur would do. That's sabotage. That's the passive-aggressive attack on the conservative ideology that has been posed by Donald J. Trump. And it all makes sense because for the vast majority of his adult life, he has not once espoused conservative leanings, conservative views, conservative philosophy, or ideology. He has always been about himself. It has always been that he thinks he knows what's best, and it's all about self-aggrandizement. Again, this is what my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, has lamented about on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. Where is this notion that we, both as a nation and a people, have a greater good? What has happened to the idea that the United States of America, as this free, open, honest, representative, Republican form of government, is greater than the sum of its parts? That's all been eradicated. That's all been erased. We're all dancing to the tune of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And we see that that is not working in the best interests of either the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, nor is it working in the form and fashion as this nation was designed to operate. These are the indelible truths that we cannot ignore. These are the self-evident truths that are there, open and obvious, clear and present for anyone who is observing these trends in an objective fashion. Again, I ask, where does that leave us? Where does it leave us? If we continue down this path and board the train to Crazy Town, how is that going to be beneficial to us? Folks, I have a feeling that it's not going to be beneficial at all. So what's the solution? What is the way that we come back from this? What is the way that we ensure that this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours can be returned to the path to prosperity? Well, that's not easy. It's not an easy path, but it's a path that we, in our capacity as the true wielders of sovereignty in the United States of America, must take. That is, we must stand up for the Constitution. And that includes freedom of expression. That includes freedom of religion. That includes any and all aspects of the Constitution. We must take the Constitution in its totality. And we must defend it against anyone of any political stripe, flavor, ideology, philosophy that would attempt to trample upon those beautiful things that are contained within it, those fundamental and inalienable rights that were endowed to us by our Creator. If we lose the Constitution, we lose our rights, and if we lose our rights, we lose everything. I cannot stress with any more emphasis, any more emphatically than I am as I speak into this microphone right here, right now, on this Solo Flight special, just how significant our rights are, just how important they are, and just how much of an extent they are currently at peril. We should not just simply bow down, capitulate, surrender, or collaborate with these diabolical forces that have given us the flip side of the same titular coin, where you have either tyranny with Hillary or despotism with Donnie. That is unacceptable. That goes against the grain, fiber, and characteristics and spirit of the American people. And the sooner we come to terms with this, and the sooner we start to say that, no, this isn't right, the sooner we can begin to advance this nation back to the path to prosperity. But it's going to take proactive action on the part of we, the people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once vibrant, flourishing republic of ours. And I know that's far easier said than done. It's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned in his magnus opus Keynes at Harvard, that these Fabian socialists would regulate in such an overzealous fashion that what they would attempt to do is to bamboozle the true popular sovereigns with this showy, flashy, fluff-filled language filled with buzzwords and playing this game of semantics to obfuscate the truth, to confuse the people. And then the people are going to be so busy trying to maintain their quality of life, their standard of living, that they're not going to have the ability to pay attention to the American system of polity, and that will allow the Fabian socialists to carry out whatever twisted, diabolical scheme that comes to their twisted minds. It's a grotesque reality, but it is one that the Fabian socialists are banking on. But we are now in the information age, ladies and gentlemen. We are now in a time where information can be found at the tips of our fingers, never more than a second or two away, with the smartphones that we have, with the internet that's available just about everywhere. We are constantly connected, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Think about what that means. That means it's now more easy than ever, or easier than ever, to disseminate propaganda. That's what Printly.com is. That's what Trumperbart News has become. That's what Pravda Matt Tinfoil Hat Drudge is all about. That's certainly what the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has been about. And they see this as the next step to continue the grand image of yellow journalism as first conceived by William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper conglomerate at the turn of the 20th century. Here we are. These are all the powers vying for that. But you know what else it means? It means that if you apply the constitutional lens, this whole idea of fostering that fluent and working knowledge of the Constitution and of your fundamental and inalienable rights, and you start actually digging into what people are saying, you can then decide for yourself what is true and what is not. And it also gives a voice to programs like we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, to purvey these messages. But again, we don't want you to take what we're saying here at face value. We want you to dig into it. We want you to research it. We want you to empower yourself, because that is the method in which we will protect our fundamental and inalienable rights. That is how we're going to protect freedom of expression. But we are going to have to come together, standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity, to let these hucksters know that we are not just going to give up, that we're not going to allow them to drastically, fundamentally, irreparably transform us into something we were never intended to be, particularly without the consent of the governed. Now, they're going to try and fabricate it, weave it, spin it, and obfuscate it to such a degree that they would try and say that it is done by the will of the people, that it's done in the favor of the people, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. It's just a part of their grand propagandistic scheme that has no place in an open and honest society, nor a free society like that of the United States of America. Here we are. Here we are in this time, in this era, seeing that the entire span and function of the electoral process has been turned into a mockery of itself. It is a shell of its former glory. People are no longer discussing grand political philosophies and ideologies. It's become a bunch of shallow, hollow, empty, and meaningless platitudes thrown out in 10-second sound bites, as though the entire body politique of the United States has been plagued by some attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But we're not ADHD. We can be better than that. And I know for a fact that we are better than that. But to give you an example of just how bad this is, because I started off today's solo flight special with mention of protests. We know that there were a couple of Trump protesters that were, or Trump supporters rather, Trump followers, Lion Trump Vidians, going out there and spraying pepper spray on protesters out there in California. But at the same time, these frothing at the mouth leftists have been violent. We see that both sides are doing this, and that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are spinning this for their own light. And then we see that somewhat attractive blonde Trump supporter that supposedly got egged. Well, she did get egged. There's photos of it. But what they don't show is the full context. It's like the Rodney King video. Oh, look at those racist LAPD people. But the video was edited. It was not there to show full context. Apparently, this girl, according to eyewitnesses and to certain media outlets that were out there too, had been flipping them off, had been waving her posterior at them, using insightful language, and then that happened. But she was smiling when it happened. Was this a setup? You know, I wouldn't put it past the Don Trumpolini, the mafioso quafioso. And I certainly wouldn't put it past the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They both engage in these diabolical and twisted games of propaganda, all to make us rawly emote, all to make us forget that there is this entire notion of manipulation. If we shut down our mental faculties, and if we stop looking at the current events in critical fashion, then we will open ourselves up to this type and style of manipulation. And that is exactly what the so-called graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the Trump Vidians want. They want us to become so caught up into it. For Trump, this is seen as a gold mine, because if there is all of this violence against his his supporters, his followers, then it will supposedly make those conservatives who are sitting on the fence, who are unsure of him because of his brash, bombastic, and vulgarian ways, to just hop off the fence and join him because they see this threat to freedom of speech. Except who was it that said that we should open up our libel laws? Trump. Now, all of a sudden, the full scale of this comedy of errors becomes open and apparent to anyone who is viewing this in a rational and objective fashion. And the one thing that we do ask of our cherished listening passengers and audience members here on Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that you take a step back. You allow your emotions to cool down and view this with the constitutional framework. And the way you do that in proactive fashion is to ask questions. Apply what is known in law school or in any type of education as the Socratic method, because it's designed to get to the heart of the matter. Ask, how does this affect the Constitution? Is this in line with the First Amendment? Does this uphold the rights of the popular sovereigns, or does this hand authority and power over to the federal government in a way in which it was never intended to be handed over? Of course, that means that you need to look at your constitutions. That means that you need to look at the other foundational documents, including the Declaration of Independence, including the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers. In those documents, combined as they are, you have the entire basis of how our government is supposed to work. And more importantly than that, you are given the litmus test at which you can discern and determine and distinguish and decide for yourself whether what the story and narrative that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is true, whether what the various candidates is saying is true, or rather what the various candidates are saying is true. That matters. The whole idea here is to empower you to think for yourself, to make determined decisions for yourself, well-educated decisions for yourself. And while Trump may have said in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that he loves the poorly educated, what he meant by that was not even school-wise, because he said the highly educated were loved too and were for him too. What he meant, and what is really meant by that statement, are those who have not taken the time to develop that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the Constitution. Because if you don't have that, then you are poorly educated. And that doesn't matter whether you have a PhD, an SJD, which is the scientific Juris Doctorate degree that's research-based, multiple PhDs, or a QuaffFD, as Donald Trump has a doctorate in that. Quaff waffling. No, it doesn't matter if you have any of that. If you don't understand the natural law that underpins everything that this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours stands for, you lack an understanding of how America's polity is designed to work. And that is dangerous. Remember that we are supposed to be a virtuous republic. We are supposed to be a well-thought-out republic where the people understand their civic duties, obligations, and above all, responsibilities. If we are ever to return to the path to prosperity, we have to stop looking for a messianic figure, a singular individual who claims in and of either him or herself to have the ability to save the nation, because if you give them that much power, as our founding fathers warned us back during the inception of this country, they also have the power to destroy America. We can't have that. That's why we have the separation of powers. That's why we have the three branches of government. That's why we have the tenets of federalism. That's why the federal government is supposed to trace all of its authority to act back to a power that's specifically enumerated to it in the Constitution. And a lot of the reason why this 2016 presidential election cycle has been the circus sideshow freak attraction that it has been is because the executive office, the highest office in the land, has been fundamentally transformed into something that it was never constitutionally defined or endowed to be. That is the problem. And when that office is charged with such extra constitutional powers, all of a sudden the character of the person who is to wield the reins of political power in this country becomes all the more important. Whoever becomes president of the United States of America is going to have to be restrained. But Trump is not restrained. Everything is about excess with him. Everything is a hedonistic style of things with him. And again, how do we be a virtuous republic if we are allowing ourselves to be bamboozled by an advocate for hedonism? Again, this is the ugliness of political correctness merged with moral relativism. If they were to have a child, it would look like this disastrous electoral process. Yet here we are, folks. Here is what we are staring directly into the face. This is what is standing in our path. This is the adversity and the way to destruction that is literally challenging us. And if we do not stop and take the time to truly think about what is happening in this country and to think about the threats that really are out there, which are to the point of nearly destroying us, both as a nation and a people, we are not going to be able to overcome these obstacles, these challenges, these destructive things that are right there in our path. And this is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, do these shows. We produce these shows to empower you. We want you to have the tools at your disposal to stand up for yourself, to stand up for your fellow citizens, to say enough is enough, to reiterate the most powerful, almost universally recognized two-letter word in the English language, no. No. No, you cannot take our government. No, our government is not up for sale. No, you cannot destroy our privileges and immunities. No, you cannot deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. No, you cannot negotiate away our constitutional form of government. That is what it's going to take, folks. That is what we have to do. There is no way around that. These positions, these duties and obligations, and above all responsibilities are non-negotiable. They're non-delegable. They belong to us in our capacity as popular sovereigns. And again, this all ties back to the original foundation and conception of our nation over 230 years ago. And remember that this is part of that longest lasting, most open and honest and free form of government that has ever been devised in the history of men. And again, you will never hear this kind of analysis uttered or considered by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, because they themselves are strict adherents to this twisted, diabolical, and radical Fabian socialist agenda. We see a whole lot of projection going on throughout this entire election cycle, where people are either projecting their self-value and worth onto candidates, whether it be Vermont Senator Nerdface Bernie Sanders or Donald J. Trump, or to a much lesser degree to Hillary Rotten Clinton. But what does that accomplish? What does that gain us? Again, I know that I've asked that question repeatedly throughout today's Solo Flight Special Edition, but it is of the utmost importance that we do get to the heart of that we do resolve this, because unless and until we start to think about it in this objective fashion, the more difficult it's going to be to actually root out the problem and create this workable, practicable, real-world solution. Because we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are dedicated not just to bringing these problems to your attention, but providing you with the solutions. Constitutional compositionism is one way. This ability to spread the word and knowledge of the Constitution, to start crowdfunding efforts, to then have a lobbying effort for no other special interest than the most important interests of all Americans, our fundamental and inalienable rights, and the proper scope and application of government as mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Of all of the functions of government, of all of the special interest advocacy groups out there, why has there not once been one for the Constitution? One that represents all of the rights of the American people. Yes, you have all of these splintered organizations. You have all of these seemingly unrelated organizations, unaffiliated organizations that are vying for certain aspects and certain rights. But we need something that's not so factionalized. We need something that is more all-encompassing, and this is where the constitutional compositionist movement comes into play. This is the movement that we, the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, must come to embrace, must stand to support, shoulder to shoulder, in solidarity and unity, to send a resounding message to those agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, and oppression. The message that we send is that we are united as a people, that we stand for our rights, that we will never back away from those rights, and that we will never allow any diabolical or destructive force to come in and strip and deprive us of these things without due process under the law and without the consent of the governed. Now, that is a very, very difficult position to hold, I know. It means taking a very tough stance in a time in which so many have become complacent. But we need to shake these people of their complacency. We need to awaken the sleeping giant so that the United States of America can take the titular steps towards regaining our prosperity. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is with a robust, virtuous popular sovereignty. The body politic of the United States of America needs to be made healthy again, and it is only we, the people, that can do that. That is why, now more than ever, fostering that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the Constitution and our fundamental and inalienable rights is so critical, crucial, and important. It is the embodiment of who we are as a nation, as a people, as a system of polity, and as a force for liberty. It is all encapsulated by the struggles that we've gone through as a nation. That document is not a living document, as the Fabian socialists would have us believe, as the historical revisionists would attempt to have us believe. That document is like the stone tablets handed down to Moses, because it is firmly based on the natural law. Once we come to terms with that, realize what the Constitution is, and understand how it is the key to unlocking these chains and shackles of governmental bondage, tyranny, and oppression, we can then take whatever steps are necessary to begin moving this country back to the path to prosperity. But again, it is our duty, our obligation, our responsibility. And we can't just turn to some messianic figure to accomplish this. It has to be done by our own hands, by the very design, by the very societal fabric of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. That is the immutable, self-evident truth that we convey to you. But we want you to look into it for yourself, to empower yourself. This is about your empowerment as a popular sovereign of the United States of America. That is what we are dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, and we will never back down from that. That is our solemn vow to you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. We will never abandon this credo, this mission of ours, to empower you. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. I promise you folks, she is not going to try and curtail your freedom of expression. She's just going to pour you some alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here at our YouTube page or our Google Plus page, or our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my First Officer Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot page, which includes audio blogs, and our Cafe Press account that allows you to freely express yourself with any type of apparel or clothing with our logo on it and our first class passenger logo on it. Our shot glasses, drinking glasses, clocks, watches, iPad, iPhone, Android pad, Android phone, covers and protectors. It's all there. You can find something at a reasonable price to represent your free expression. Go ahead and take a look at that, folks, and give us a little bit of support here. As always, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We'll see you next time. Do take care.